Welcome to Designing Cities for All, another episode, and it's part of our 2-year-long activity and research program,
where we take a deep dive into designing products, spaces, and systems for all.
Just because you feel safe, or you feel welcome, or you feel included, doesn't mean that everyone else around you feels the same way.
We don't stand alone. We're not individuals that somehow planet or an island, you know?
And I think that's the beautiful thing of a diverse society, that everyone can add something from out of their own experience.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
I think if you can build relationships and use design as a tool to build those relationships, the better off we're all going to be.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
Belonging is a very, very important concept.
You can try to take someone's place for a while, but you don't have the lived experience.
Let's begin by acknowledging similarity and affinity.
Be a person, not your role.
I think inclusion is not a choice.
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
In order to create truly inclusive public spaces that are accessible to everyone, we have to underline what everyone actually is.
Real inclusion, it's got nothing to do with the norm, but it's like something that we create from all different perspectives.
You know, so even when we bring everybody at the table, does everybody's voice count the same?
Because it's a big question of who tells these stories.
You know, the more I explore about other cultures, other religions, is the more ingredients I have to make the architecture and to answer the questions I get from society.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. You just saw the wrap-up video of the first year of Designing Cities for All. And this is a 2-year program, activity program in which we take a deep dive in designing products, places, and systems for all. So welcome to the first part of this series, Decolonizing Design. In this triptych, we explore the history of colonization and erasure, the act of erasing people, culture, and histories, the way colonization still shapes our present, and finally, how we look towards collective healing and repairing the future. I'm so happy you're here, both in the room and online. My name is Chihiro Geuzenbroek, and I will be your host in this series. Once upon a colonial time, in this episode, this event today, we will look at the role of storytelling. So from childhood to adulthood, we have encountered stories through fairy tales and comics and books, history books, television, stories about far away magical kingdoms, princesses, heroes, villains. And here is where many people already get introduced into ideas of discovery or so-called savages or racist stereotypes. We are groomed to see the royal family or police as protagonists instead of villains and oppressors. So then there are also many stories that just don't get told. They are erased. And these are often told, these stories that we do here are often told from Eurocentric, heteronormative, male, and white gaze. So how we tell stories, who tells stories, and which stories are told shape our reality and our perspective of the world. And this is what we're here to discuss tonight with an amazing lineup. So we'll talk about these erased stories with Chautuileo Tranamil, Danick Trouwloon, Geoffrey van de Ven, and joining us online from Peru, Daniela Ortiz. I'm so happy. Give them a warm welcome. Are you excited? I'm excited. And I'm so happy you're here in the room. Also, the people online, if you have questions, there is a menti.com code that you can use to ask questions for the second half when we have the panel. So if you have questions during the program, please go to menti.com and insert the following code 46515828. Yep, also appearing on the screen. And if you're here in the room during the panel part, please feel free to raise your hand, and I will give you the opportunity to ask of either ones of those mics that are here in the room to ask your question. So we asked all speakers to share a story of a personal hero whose history or story is erased. So we'll get to that in the panel. But first, we'll get a chance to meet everyone of this beautiful lineup. I'm so excited you're here, like each and every one. Did I say everything? Yeah, I think it's ready to get started. Are you excited? Yes, me too. So I'll start. Chautuileo Tranamil, you're Mapuche, Pehuenche, a group of indigenous people of the south of South America. What and when was the first time you heard a Mapuche story? And what does it have to do with historical colonization?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, first of all. Thank you for being here. It is an interesting question because I can't really remember the place I was, but I do remember the emotions, or I do remember the feelings. I think this is, for me, was also the first time I recognized something that's deep down inside of you. And it's really also, I don't know if someone have seen it, but this is a movie about the Little Mermaid, the new one, and you see the children reacting to the mermaid. And it was exactly that feeling. I remember that it was like, okay, this is a hero. This is someone who really made an enormous impact on us as a community. He died, but how did he die? And then I started digging into the story, and I asked the questions like, why don't we know about this person? Because he should be like next to Superman. He should be next to, I don't know, whatever hero there is. And it's really like...
And who are we talking about? This mystery person we don't know.
Galvarino. And I like this person so much because, first of all, you think, wow, what is this person doing on my screen? But it's the story behind, I need to tell you. And there was this Galvarino. He was taken by the Spanish people. They chopped his hands as a warning sign. So there was... Yeah, he could have done like two things. One was just go to a village and try to live as much as possible without your hands. But he didn't do that. He didn't choose for that path. He said, no, I'm going back, but not with hands because I don't have any, but then with kind of, I don't know how you call it in English, but it was like...
hooks or sword hooks.
We don't know exactly.
Yeah.
That's the story. That's like the myth. But we knew he went back
to fight another day.
To fight, and this is the story I like to tell. Also, like my son, he's going to feel very much empowered, not by the aggressive part, but more the part like whatever comes.
Never be defeated.
Exactly. And this is the kind of the resistance.
And this is also tying into the Mapuche having never been conquered.
Exactly. It's really like one of the myths are told by the women, are told by the mothers. So it's up to us to tell the story again and again. So because the men were most of the times at the battlefield. So it's up to the women to share the stories. This is like kind of how people were telling my...
And for people who don't know you, the reason that you might not have encountered this story early in your life is maybe because you weren't raised with your family.
Exactly. It's really like when I saw this image, it was really resonated just like the Little Mermaid, little ones. I had to call them like this now. Because it was exactly how it was. When we talk about colonial history, or when you talk about this kind of like hard stories, we have to know that it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I am the one of the persons who got stolen by colonists, who got stolen by the church. So I'm not even that old. So
and for people who don't know this, you're referring to adoption and actually international adoption where there's never permission of the parent for their kid to be taken away. So you're actually a stolen child.
Yeah, they call it adoption, but we call it child trafficking. It's like robbing children from the communities, from their families.
And it's only been like 1 year or 2 years since that has been like at least renounced as a horrific practice, because the Netherlands was doing this in quite a big scale.
I think now when you compare it to the reparation like policies, you see that in Chile there's now like an investigation, a formal investigation that don't even call it adoption anymore.
Of
so
course.
it's really child trafficking.
Yeah.
And you see it also in the Netherlands. You see it in more like countries. But the thing is that most of the children, most of the families were being torn apart. They were indigenous. They were like marginalized people. And
they're the people that they think they can get away with because they're ranked in this colonial hierarchy.
Yeah, and of course it was also like this white feminism, like the how do you say it? The education, like the teachers from the border schools. They were white women most of the time. They believed in the church. Nuns. They believed in the church, like this kind of like images, and they thought that whatever we should do now is like we need to protect the child against this barbarian, how do you say it? Barbarian. We need to save it, and we need to make sure that it can be like a useful citizen. It can be like a child that has the Christian values. But we need
also taken out of their culture. Like first they stole the kids to put them in colonial schools, and now they stole the kids to put them in different families. It's
like the cultural genocide. It's
another
really
chapter
like,
of genocide.
Yes, it's like the institutional racism, and it wasn't that long ago. So it's really like something also in relation to the Queen. Stolen children,
Drop that in there.
Children. It's really like this practice. We can talk over and over, but it was there.
And so now you are co-founder of a decolonial organization, Arales, and you are coordinating in an ongoing project, Indigenous Liberation. Can you say a little bit about those practices and what motivates you there in that work?
Well, this is my mother at the left, and we are standing here near, I think it was The Hague. So I know my mother now, I think, more than many years now. So I'm
your
the
biological real mother.
My mother.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to have her like also next to me, even though she's not here, she's in spirit with me. So when you think about decolonization, when you think about the things that we should do, like for the next coming 100 years or for the next coming, like, I don't know how long we need to work for this, is healing. And I think that many people here in the Global North are talking about decolonization as climate justice, but I don't need to do that. It's not my job to do that. My job is to heal. My job is something else. And that is, of course, related to the history. It's related not only to the personal history, but also like for the role I maybe play in this project. And I know that many, not all indigenous, but also like people from Africa who went with the boat, who went to Abya-Yala, and who had the same...
Abya-Yala being what is now known the Americas.
Exactly. And they have the same, like traumas, being stripped from your identity, went to a place, like unknown places, and needed to
uprooted.
Forget. Yes, and it is like many like similarities you see in the history. So what can I do now is I studied for creative therapy back in the days, and I was thinking I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the therapist, but I do want to do community healing.
Yeah.
And this is the way that I can bring it all together to find a way, a roadmap, a path where we can all join. And sometimes if you are not able to join because it's too difficult, the emotional burden are too heavy, it's okay. And we're going to do it, and you are invited to join whenever you can.
And one next opportunity is the 12th of October when there's a whole festival of Indigenous liberation, a protest of Indigenous liberation around this building and in this building. We'll talk more about that later. We're going to go online. We're going to connect with artist, activist Daniela Ortiz, based in Peru at the moment, or from Peru, should I also say. Daniela, much of your artistic practice explores and demonstrates that these themes of decolonization. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit and take us with you through your practice.
Hi everyone. Thanks a lot for having me and for organizing this space. And thanks for everyone that is here and also the people who are sharing their stories, practices, and work. And yeah, I am an artist, but also a militant. And I also consider that in my case, for me, it's important to separate what is militancy, because it's a different type of work to organize in assemblies, to have an organization, or those type of work. But I also think art can be, in a sort, useful in specific ways in order to approach denounces, analysis, etc. No? So through my work in the last, I don't know, like 13 years, 15 years, I don't know how many years, I have been like using artistic works to analyze and also to reivindicate, for example, anti-colonial resistances, which is something that I consider really important to do together with denouncing, because many times there is, let's say, a lot of focus on the denounce, and many times there is not a focus on the resistance, that there is people who are organized, that are working on working against those type of colonial violences. I don't know, maybe if you can share my images, but I have put my website so you can have an approach of my work. Yeah, I do, technically I use whatever I have and I can use, like painting, oil painting, embroidery, ceramics also. These are puppets, for example. I was invited to do a performance, and for me it was really difficult because I'm doing a lot of handmade things, and it was really difficult to think of a performance with no handmade elements. And then I thought about puppets, and actually it was done in Italy. And actually, that puppet show, that is the first one that I have done in like a series of 3 now. It's about a removal of custodies in the context. In the context of Europe nowadays, which is a reality, social services approaching migrant racialized families, working class families, but mostly single mothers, migrants, and removing their children using this excuse of the superior interest of the child, in the same logic of what Chautuileo is saying, no? It's a colonial continuation, no? And I think it's really important to see that all this type of institutional racism in the context of Europe in the last 30 years has to do with a continuation of that colonial violence that has been historically inflicted in the global South, as they were sharing before, no?
And I had the privilege of seeing some of the beautiful pictures you also shared with us. You use some kind of imagery that is also reminiscent of like children books, or the imagery. I also saw one of your talks where you play with a very racist children's song and turn it around into a anti-colonial children's song. Can you speak to your kind of language of visualization?
Yeah, when I had my first child, like 5 years ago, I started seeing all the material produced for children and its racist and colonial content, no? And how many books about Christopher Columbus, for example, normalize a history that is a history of violence and hides the violence that happened there, no?
Or
and
celebrates
from that
it.
situation, yeah, that's for example, the ABC of Racist Europe is one of the first works that I did using children's book as a point of, as a beginning, no? But also worried about which information my son was going to get, no? And then, for example, something that I have been doing continuously is, as you say, like using a type of aesthetic that is also more approachable, and also making a lot of publications, which I consider is important, because many times in the context of the museum, as I work many times with museum, you know, the white cube with this whole system that it has for people to do not connect with the work you're doing. And many times publications or taking out the work out of the museum works much better for communicating the things that I'm interested in, and also the aesthetical thing, no? To do not do this type of virtuosism or this type of conceptual white cube thing that people get thinking that they are not going to understand what they are seeing, no? And yeah, and then also sincerely, I really like doing things that are under my possibility of doing, no? The paintings usually are quite small. It's no huge artworks. They are small things, but with a quite deep content and a lot of investigation and layers.
I love them.
For explaining things that I think is really important to be pedagogical in that sense, no?
Yeah, totally. There's one more thing I really love to get into before we already move, because time always goes way too fast, this colonial time. But that is your amazing work on exposing border racism of Europe. And maybe you can speak to how that has been part of your journey, maybe also a personal journey of experiencing the migration bureaucracy and the demeaning actually design of border practices that are part of Fortress Europe and that are sometimes totally forgotten about when we talk about decolonization. Like, borders are not there's a relative small movement when it comes to actually abolishing borders. So that imagination of debordering and actually knowing what kind of racist migration bureaucracy is in place. I would love to hear your thoughts, or also your reflection on how that shaped your work.
Yeah. Well, I had personally the experience of living in Spain for 13 years, so I know the immigration office, I know the process of systematic illegalization. I know that renewing your papers or getting your papers is almost a trial against the Spanish state in order for you to have the right to stay in the territory. And in the case, for example, of my son that was born in Spain, he didn't even have the right to be Spanish. Not that we wanted to be Spanish, because I reject the Spanish identity, obviously, but we know that the nationality and the residency permits are the only way we can have the right to stay without being deported and having a risk of deportation, which is, let's say, that the worst thing that can happen. But then you have many consequences when you don't have papers, no? Because papers are what give you these semi-temporal rights. That is what they give in the European Union to migrant people that have the privilege to get papers, like in my case. Other migrant compañeros, compañeras end up being murdered in the border areas. And as you mentioned, at the moment, there are more than 70,000 people murdered by the European Union consciously. In the context of Spain, for example, more than 30,000. And there is a whole design, on one hand, of a legality that creates these murderers, of a media that creates a narrative of these murderers, also an ideological, important work that power is doing in order to have people, white European people, living normally with the borders full of deaf people, murdered people, because it's not people who die in an accident. And actually, the death in the border areas started when the immigration laws started. And then you have things like the image you are seeing, the fence in the Melilla border that has been designed by a company specifically to kill people. It is designed to kill and to harm the people who try to cross the border and to disobey these colonial laws, no? So also in my work, something that I have been doing and trying to do is to be like really pedagogical about this, because I think we need to know our enemy in order to confront it. We really need to understand which is the legal system, how is it working. When we talk, for example, about the removal of children by the social services, people say, like, how come if they are good? Like the same as Chautuileo was saying, how the nuns are going to be bad if they are doing charity with us. The same happens with the social services when they are stealing the children of migrant women to give them in adoption to white families or to put them in the system and create profit out of them and to see them again and to see children as if they are a good they can exploit as how they exploit our territories, and they have been doing that for 500 years in the global south.
Definitely. And also when it comes to these border practices, we should never forget that for every euro that goes from global north to global south in aid, so-called, there is like 25 euros being sucked away from global south, and like it's the global south that is funding the riches of the global north. So this is why we have this bordering regime to actually border the theft of systemic theft of other places. I am so excited to talk more with you, Daniela, but I'm going to move on, and we'll love to see you back in the panel because I'm turning to my right now. Oh, no, yeah, I am turning to my right now, right? Yeah, Geoffrey. There's a wrong order here. Where are you? Geoffrey is out of the list. Whoa. Hi, Geoffrey. Hi. You are a spoken word artist and ambassador of Sprakeloos. Can you first say a little bit how decolonization is part of your creative practice to get an idea of who you are?
Yes. I think it somehow ended up inherently being part of my practice, and that's something that I originally went out of my way to think about. But it's because of the stories that I decide to tell or that I choose to tell are stories that have been typically erased by colonization and by, I guess, the mindset that goes along with that present day. And those are inherently tied to each other. So by me telling those stories, I end up working, I guess, decolonizing forces.
Yeah. And can you give an example of such storytelling? You just made a production called Het is niet nieuw. It's not new. What is not new?
Yes. So it's a show about the queer history of Africa, which is a very long, wide, deep history that existed for many, many years until colonization started happening. And it was erased, and we don't talk about it anymore. We pretend like it didn't exist, and that has very real-life consequences in the continent today. And I was like, if no one's going to talk about it, then I guess I will do it. So I wrote a whole show about it.
I can't wait to see it. So talk about your process, because when we talk about erasure, we're not talking about it. It's also like literally harder to find that information. There's the algorithm to the internet. There's power dynamics and everything. What was your process?
A lot of being frustrated.
Keeping it real.
No, my process started with the story of Nzinga Mabande, who I'll explain later, I guess.
Can you slow it down?
Yes, of course.
And
Nzinga Mabande.
Mabande.
Yes.
Wonderful.
There's several different versions of her name. Also, when you Google her, there's like 8 different spellings because it was translated and then moved into other languages and then badly recorded. And she was, I would describe her just as a queer badass.
Okay, yeah.
She lived in, present-day Angola. And for 40 years, she managed to keep the Portuguese forces at bay and had this, like, cat-mouse fight with them that she very frequently won. And she was queer. She had a wedding that's described as a heterosexual wedding with another woman, which says enough about what we used to think about gender norms. When she used to lead her troops in battle, she wore male and female clothing, and just the entire current black-white gender lines did not exist.
The binary didn't fit.
And after reading her story, I became very aware of this entire history that I somehow knew existed, but I never had any tangible proof that it was there. And I started Googling and researching and asking around, and by doing that, I came across more and more stories that I felt needed to be heard and needed to be told.
Yeah.
And my way of doing that was writing a show.
And I see you also brought some pictures.
Yes.
Can you talk us through it?
Yes. In this picture, I am a character called Kabakamavanga, who was a homosexual king in present-day Uganda. Back then, it was called Buganda. It's a kingdom within Uganda. And the Kabaka was actually dethroned by the British after he spent years trying to fight off their forces. But they eventually swayed his brother and several of his male lovers up until a point that Christianity was so rooted within the environment that they were then starting to see him as beastly or savage, I suppose. And he ended up leaving his throne. So he was relatively bad. He actually, from exile, still fought the British over and over again. He got it like an army. I was like, okay.
I see a recurring theme of never quitting to fight the colonizer.
He never quit. He fought until the last
# inspiration. Cool. Did you have any other pictures?
Yes, this is Eidus. I'm going to do Eidus during the intermission later. They were a person that lived in 70s Nigeria, and my mother actually knew them. And the person was born a male, but didn't present that way. So wore female clothing, wore makeup, dressed up, looked gorgeous. And I wanted to tell their story because it's a very happy story. Eidus, we don't know the person's name anymore. So I called the person Eidus, which is Urobo for beautiful. Because they were very beautiful. They were very happy. And they knew that they were gorgeous. So they also couldn't be bullied. Like, you couldn't get at them because they were just like...
Too charming.
I'm too gorgeous to be bullied by you. Like, if you want to come for me, check your clothes first. Which I find such a happy, fun story to tell. And I found it important to have a story like that as well. A beautiful, happy story.
And so it's kind of sad and scary. I mean, I'm very excited about your show. But it's kind of sad and scary that these are stories that haven't been easy to find and haven't been told in the Netherlands. How do you analyze that situation here in the Netherlands? What is keeping it? What are the dynamics
of the story not being told?
Yeah.
I think maybe it takes a specific person to be interested enough to go out of their way to start digging up these stories. I think a lot of people just don't know that these stories ever existed. And when I mention this, when I'm talking about the show, I always see surprise. And I always see people go, oh, I didn't know this was there. And I was like, well, yeah, because you didn't look for it. And I happened
We couldn't find them.
We couldn't find it, yes.
So many variations of that.
Exactly. And I happened to be in a place where I ran into one story and I got an itch and I kept scratching until I had 15 other stories.
Yeah.
And I think what partly annoys me is that there is this narrative of gender diversity and homosexuality and kind of the whole queer spectrum, transgenderism, if that's the correct word, being new and being something from present day and being something that, you know, it's the same.
This is part of the colonial narrative also when it talks about colonialism in the past.
Yes.
And it talks about innovation as the thing that will save us or that is progressive, where that's like really screwing up the whole history and also what is remedy.
The history and sort of the present day narrative of that, because by retelling history in this way, you're changing the conversations we have nowadays, for example, with African leaders being like, oh, but it's not traditionally you, so you should now meet the Europeans in our modern standards and do this, where it's like, no. Don't meet the Europeans in their modern standards. Meet yourself in your own history. When I'm talking about being frustrated, this is where a lot of that frustration lies.
Yeah.
So that's why I like to talk about this and also called it It's Not New. Stop pretending that the Netherlands created gay marriage.
Yeah.
It existed way before. And there's a very...
I'm hearing the snaps.
So that's, yeah.
Amazing. I should mention that the performance of Geoffrey will be in Dutch, but afterwards... but we will add English subtitles, so that I have mentioned now. Coming in live. And also a reminder, if you are watching online, that you can send me messages and I will take them. Oh! That is so weird. Okay, well, then... Fix it. So yeah, we'll get back to you, and we'll hear also a little part of your performance later on. We're gonna go to Danick. Woohoo! Last but definitely not least, Danick, you're part of the Six Islands scene and the collective that made that happen. You're from Curaçao. So these 6 islands have something to do with Dutch colonialism. Can you speak to how this initiative came about and also a little bit about the zine?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. That's the 3rd issue of our zine.
And the physical
and the
copies.
First and 2 ones.
Ooh, we can do ooh.
And yeah, I can try to give voice to the moment where the zine was first sort of conceptualized. I wasn't part of it, so I might also look at Alex and Iki if I'm, doing it justice. But I think it came very much from a need to tell more stories about the 6 islands where they are told on our terms. And I think this kind of need culminated in the Black Archive, where there was a sense of, wow, this is possible, and there's a body of work that speaks to the Black experience and says we were here and this is who we were. And I think a bit of a hunger to have something like that.
Another itch.
But for the 6 islands, yeah, a little itch that was being scratched. And I think there was some discussion about what's the right format. Do we want a podcast? Do we want a zine? And I think the idea for something more physical, I think connects really well to the archive, to the storytelling, the fact that there's a lot that's been written about us or
without you,
or about the islands without us. So as if they were a place without people. So yeah, I think the idea to make a zine very much came from the need to write ourselves into the archive, to give voice to we were there. And over time, I think that stayed very much, but there's also a bit of a need to not just write ourselves into the past, but also kind of write ourselves into the future. So it's also a call to action, a bit of a manifesto now, a place where we can think together and dream together and kind of, really think about what it is we want for the 6 islands. So yeah, I think...
Can you name a few of the topics that are addressed in the zine?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to answer that is to say that each issue kind of has its own topic. So the first one was about language, which I think within the kingdom or within the 6 islands, there's so many different languages, and sometimes there's implicit hierarchical differences, or when you...
centering certain languages
over others, but also then you move to the Netherlands and everyone's like, oh wow, you speak such good Dutch.
Oh,
how why would that be the case? And so you understand the erasure. So I think the first issue really speaks to all of the things around language, and the second is about reimagining sexuality. So yeah, a lot of queer identity, but also just kind of reimagining what our sexuality is, and liberating. I think also being part of the diaspora affords us a freedom that maybe we didn't have growing up on the island. So also kind of creating a space where you can be a bit more explorative. And then the third issue is on exploring decolonial practices in Caribbean communities. So it's very broad.
Is that the thick issue?
This is the thick issue.
There's the reason.
Yeah, because people had a lot to say about decolonial practices, is what we realized. And I think we were talking about it a lot, and we had a sense that sometimes it was very elusive. We all knew what we wanted to say, but were we all saying the same thing? And it was stayed very much in the air.
And I can imagine a zine is also a good form for multiple voices coming through.
Yeah.
I wonder how you tackled that, like a sense of collectivity, but also maybe difference.
Yeah.
Giving voice to difference that is also in the room.
Yeah, I think
I haven't read it yet, so I'm just yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, no, I think for us it's been a very organic process, and I think that's been really important to kind of making sure that all of the voices come true, and that sort of they're reflected in the zine. So maybe also to share a little bit about what our process is. At some point, usually there's a call out around a certain issue, a certain topic, and people are invited to contribute. Anything. It can be a written piece. It can be something visual. This one also has some audio. There's a dance performance in it. Shout out to Shadi. So there's all sorts of different materials.
The dance performance. I love it. This is so out of the frame.
So we really try to also think of, you know what, this is a physical form. It also exists in digital form, but we want it to be something that's physical. But how can we kind of break the barriers? How can we make it organic? What's out there that kind of needs to find its way in here?
In many ways, outside the box.
We try.
Yeah. So I'm very curious. You have an experience of being here in the Netherlands, and you already gave one little example of icky moments that you have with Dutch people misplacing and erasing histories. Can you talk a little bit more about the erasure that you faced in your life coming here in the Netherlands? Like, how does this theme of erasing histories sit in your own life?
It's very prominent, but it's almost like it's there, but I sit with it all the time, but I can't seem to kind of get to the bottom of it. I think there's a lot of anecdotes that I could share, like language, or someone once told me to my face that they know very little about the islands. And that's okay because they don't care about them. To my face, conversational. This was something that was an absolute truth to them, that they never problematized and felt comfortable telling me. So that was not just the erasure of I think we were talking about the curriculum and the fact that we share the same curriculum except for history. So we are taught our history, and the Netherlands gets taught the Dutch history, and there's a gap there.
Yeah.
And so it was about erasure.
Yeah.
And
he felt so comfortable in the hierarchy of life that he was comfortable telling you that your life didn't matter.
And I had to sit with that. It didn't even register what was being told to me at the moment. And I think there's a lot of anecdotes that kind of speak to that. And these are I think my early years in the Netherlands, where I'm not maybe sure what's happening to me, or what does that person mean? Is it out of ill intent? I don't think it was.
There's a lot of ignorance, but then ignorance is not innocent.
Yeah.
But then it's also reproduced in our school, so it's also, I have to think of one thing a person told me who is from Bonaire, and she said that in her schools they learn about cows eating grass, but there are no cows in Bonaire. But they don't learn what the leguanas eat or the goats eat, and the different plants that grow on the island that are nutritious to them, and just one little thing, but too many. We're almost going to your performance, so maybe you get ready. Is there a last thing you would like to share?
Oh, this is a lot of pressure.
We'll get back to you in the panel.
I'm excited for the performance. Maybe that's one way to
okay.
transition.
And then we'll get back to you afterwards, and we see more beautiful pictures of your work.
The zines.
Yeah. I like it. Coming up, a little piece from the piece Het is niet nieuw. Geoffrey van de Ven.
Er zijn zoveel verhalen over Afrika die je nooit te horen krijgt. En normaal gesproken raak ik gepikeerd als iemand het hele continent over één kam probeert te scheren. Maar er is één ding wat alle landen herdenkt. En dat is kolonialisme. Kijk, het is een joekel van een continent met een hele rijke geschiedenis die nooit de kans heeft gehad om zichzelf te documenteren. En met de verovering van landen en geforceerde religie zijn we veel van deze kennis kwijtgeraakt. Dat wat wij weten, gewist. De geschiedenis die wij vandaag de dag kennen, die is volledig incompleet. Sommige hoofdstukken genegeerd, andere verkeerd gerepresenteerd. Dus tenzij wij zelf gaan zoeken, komen we nooit de ware verhalen tegen. Kijk, ik denk dat wat we vergeten is dat de geschiedenis van Afrika niet een geschreven geschiedenis is. Het is een geschiedenis die leefde in verhalen. En die verhalen die werden van generatie tot generatie tot generatie aan elkaar doorgegeven. Ik vind dat persoonlijk bijzonder mooi. Zo'n manier van een geschiedenis in stand houden. Verhalen vertellen. Heeft iets fragiels. Bewegends. Maar je kan het ook kwijtraken. Dat betekent dat als je een land heeft, en dat land heeft een verhalen, en dan komt een ander land aan, die neemt daar de macht over, en die neemt hun eigen normen en waarden mee, dat die verhalen daar niet meer tussen passen. En een eerste generatie die kent die verhalen nog wel. Een tweede generatie al wat minder. En de derde generatie die krijgen ze niet eens meer te horen. Zo kan je een geschiedenis kwijtraken. Waar het heel helder wordt, is als je gaat kijken naar de LGBTQ-verhouding op het continent. Daar waar leiders vandaag de dag zeggen dat het niet traditioneel ons is. Dat het een ideologie is die is geïmporteerd vanuit het Westen. Terwijl precies het tegenovergestelde waar is. De huidige anti-queer mindset was geïmporteerd als onderdeel van het kolonialisme en geforceerde katholicisme. Gezondheid. Kijk, kort door de bocht betekent dit dat er mensen ergens woonden. En toen kwam er iemand anders aan die zei, nu geloof je hierin. Als je keuzes dan zijn tussen aanpassen of de dood, dan is die snel gemaakt. Gelukkig, als je een beentje begint te graven, begin je links en rechts wel voorbeelden te zien van hoe het eerder was. Bijvoorbeeld Evus. We weten mijn naam niet meer. Dus noem mij Eruvoen. Erus in het kort. Ik dacht, ik kies iets wat bij me past. Eruvoen betekent schoonheid in mijn taal. En dat was ik ook. Ik had niemand ervoor nodig om mij dit te vertellen, maar toch hoorde ik het graag. Niemand? Ik moet hard werken voor een complimentje hier.
You're gorgeous.
Thank you. Kijk, ik leefde in de jaren 70 Nigeria die mij niet goed snapte. Ik wist niet zo goed wat het met mij moest doen. Ik werd veel nageroepen. Er werd veel naar mij gestaard. Maar ik kon er goed mee omgaan. Ik was gezegend met een grote mond en een scherpe tong. Wat kijk je? Zei ik dan. Je bent gewoon jaloers dat ik er beter uitzie dan je zus. De wereld was veel met mij bezig. En ik ook. Gelukkig. Gelukkig had ik mijn vriendinnen. Zij accepteerden mij als mezelf. Bij hun kon ik mezelf zijn. We deden van alles samen. Vlochten elkaars haren. Ik deed iedereen's make-up. Ik was er nog beter in. En de meiden vroegen altijd aan mij, oh Enes, hoe moet ik aantrekken? Kijk, op de een of andere manier wist ik traditionele kleding om te toveren tot het uniform van een koningin. En met moderne kleding? Met moderne kleding kon ik zelfs een eens homofobe mannetje laten blozen. Jammer genoeg konden we niet altijd bij elkaar zijn, mijn vriendinnen en ik. Er komt toch een punt dat mensen naar huis moesten en ja, ik moest dat dan ook. Thuis kwam ik mijn ouders tegen.
Die wisten niet zo goed wat ze met mij moesten doen, dus besloten ze mij te verstoppen. Mijn vader was een rijke businessman, die had vaak etentjes bij ons thuis. Ik werd dan vriendelijk verzocht mezelf correct te kleden of in mijn kamer te blijven. En schoonheid die ik was, ik gehoorzaamde. Meestal. Mijn moeder probeerde mij ook te verstoppen. Wist eveneens als mijn vader niet wat ze met mij aan moest, maar ze tolereerde het wel. Had hij zelf op de tijd dat ik deze schoonheid een fase was. Hij, zei ze dan, hij is nog jong. Hij groeit hier wel uit. Hij zal op een gegeven moment volwassen worden en zich niet meer bezighouden met dit soort taferelen. Het woord hij snijdt elke keer net iets dieper. Kijk, we hadden in mijn tijd niet het vocabulaire om elkaar te vragen wat onze voornaamwoorden zouden zijn. Dus we weten niet wat ik gebruikt had als ik een keuze had. Wel weten dat ik me niet voordeed als een hij. Kleden me niet zo, gedraagde me niet zo. Mannen stapten mij niet en ik hun ook niet, eerlijk gezegd. Nou wel. Snap jij, man? Ja, bedoel ik. Je hebt er niks aan. Dus we weten niet dat ik gebruikt had als ik een keuze had. Ik denk dat ik zij haar had gebruikt. Misschien hem hun.
We zullen helaas moeten wachten totdat de volledige show weer bij ons terugkomt. Maar de hoop is op een mooie tour volgend jaar. En al eentje die al in de planning staat voor november in Harderwijk.
Ja, in Harderwijk, ja.
Ja, I made notes. Heel even checken, hoe kwam het binnen? Ciao.
English, right?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we're moving back to English. Yeah. Thank you. So we're talking about how did it actually land in your belly?
It's so much recognition, so much like it felt really like you telling my story as well. And I think that this recognition is really felt like being indigenous but not being indigenous, or being token, feeling like a token. Not feeling comfortable in society, feeling weird. A lot of things that resonates with my own story, but I think that with many indigenous, when you don't see the visibility or recognition about erasing history, I think
and the particular role of religion.
Yeah.
I think you have something to talk about there as well. Can you say something more about religion as in the role of erasure?
So I think what a lot of people forget is that in colonial times, religion was weaponized. It was used as a way of disassociating people from their own culture, used as a way of kind of creating this space because they realized that people's own cultures and people's own religions and people's own stories gave them power and gave them strength and gave them something to fight for. So if I go to this place and I instill this religion that paints everything that you were as savage and says you must now believe in this, and unless you believe in this, I will kill you, which is essentially what happened. You start creating this space where you stop giving someone something to fight for. Because if I don't know where I'm from, and I don't know my original traditions, and I don't know our own ways, what am I going to fight for? In some cases, if I don't even know my own surname, what am I going to fight for? So yeah, religion was largely weaponized and was, especially with queer stories, one of the biggest starts of erasure, because the religion that the colonialists brought with them painted anything queer as savage and unhuman and disgusting.
Dirty. Which is, degrading practice.
Yeah.
Also, Christianity in the Americas basically gave legitimization of saying you don't have a soul, so we can take your land. And that doctrine still stands with the discovery doctrine.
I think that the church in itself is, I always say, one of the most evil institutions, not only by the values and the beliefs that they were giving us, but also by how do you say it, by the willingness to do so, the willingness to go into the families, to take children, to go to the women, and to do like a lot of things like sterilization because they were indigenous. It was happening in Peru and in Guatemala. They were going to like the schools to make sure that whatever you were as indigenous, it was gone. And and I can't even believe that I was being raised like as a Christian, and as soon I recognized like what is going on. I thought this needs to get away. I will never ever enter a church without having maybe 1 minute of silence for all the stolen generation, for all the children, for all the horrific atrocities that happens in the name of the church, in the name of the Christian people. So really to make sure.
And it's not in the past. Like here also, I've spoken to people from indigenous from Suriname, indigenous from Ghana, and their own communities are divided when they reclaim indigenous practices because the Christianized people are like, oh, that's devilish, or oh, that's demonic. And that's a way of now putting the weapon in your own community to stab your own community, even brothers and sisters.
But I think that's also a natural cause of these stories being erased. If you didn't know these stories happened and existed beforehand, and if you believe in this kind of skewed narrative of, oh, then Christianity came, we were all saved, of course you're going to see older traditions in the wrong light. Whereas if we start telling these stories and make these stories part of our basic education and part of our childhood and make them normal, which is what they once were, which is why I'm like annoyed.
What is normal?
What is normal? Make them every day. Then the one-off occurrence that somebody does something very traditional also no longer is something to be scared of or something so otherworldly outside of your Christian practices that you have to paint it as anything other than normal.
We're going to go to the erased stories also of Daniela and Danick. And then we're also going to look at the audience for participation. So already start thinking if you have questions. Daniela, can I welcome you back onto the magic screen?
Thanks.
The voice of God coming from behind me. I would love to hear about who you would like to honor today, an inspiration, somebody who has been erased mostly from our history.
Yeah, actually, it would be wonderful if we can put the first image of that series. That is the one that Fernandito Tupac Amaru, which is a person and whose spirit I would like to bring today, appears in this short series of 4 paintings. Fernandito Tupac Amaru was the son of Micaela Bastidas and Tupac Amaru, who were the leaders of an anti-colonial rebellion here in the area of Cusco. And his parents, together with all the people that participated in the rebellion, were murdered actually by law. And it's amazing when you read the declaration of death of the Spaniards to Tupac Amaru, how specific it is, not only in killing them, but even in dismembering their bodies and sending each part of the bodies to each part of the country in order to indoctrinate people to do not organize to have another anti-colonial rebellion, no? To create fear in regard to that, no? And also to disappear the body, which is a practice of colonial violence really important. For example, there are many other anti-colonial leaders whose bodies, like Patrice Lumumba, has been disappeared. Recently, the tooth went back to Congo, for example, but it has been disappeared for a long period. But the little son of Micaela Bastidas and Tupac Amaru was not murdered. Actually, in this paternalistic narrative of we're going to be nice with him because he is 8 years old, so the Spanish decided not to murder him, but they imposed him to be sent to an African territory that they had colonized also. But then in the process, the Spanish decided not to send him because they said in his memory is the memory of the rebellion of his parents. So maybe he will make an alliance with African people and get together to make an anti-colonial rebellion over there. So we better take him to Spain. And the only person who was alive of the Tupac Amaru family was sent to Spain, to a Spanish prison, and ended up dying of a depression in the neighborhood of Lavapiés, which is nowadays one of the neighborhoods with a big migrant population and therefore a big anti-racist resistance. So this series of paintings explains the story of Fernandito Tupac Amaru, whose body haven't been returned to the territory of the Andes nowadays, that it should return because the Spanish have kidnapped his body. So this series of paintings ask for his spirit to give strength to the anti-racist movement in the context of Spain, to tear down the Columbus Monument and use it to tear down the door of the immigrant detention center and liberate the people who are detained there to be deported. And then also it asks for his spirit to give strength to the mothers and the children who are kidnapped at the social services and to burn and take down the detention centers for minors. And then also in the last image is asked for his body to come back to the Andes in an act of reparation. And also not only his body, but for example, so many artworks, so many, for example, books like the Wamampoma book that is in Denmark, and so many things that have been looted in order not only to take it to Europe, but also to manipulate the narrative in regard to that, because all those European museums that have looted artworks from the global south, they don't only kidnap the artwork from here, but they also manipulate what they are going to say in regard to the global south to reinforce this savage narrative that we were discussing before, no?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation, because that's the real... I hope everybody feels pain in their stomach right now, because that's the real violence that is both historical and ongoing of just really disappearing our bodies, and it's an attack on existence. And if I remember correctly, it was Tupac Amaru who said, "I will return as millions," which is a beautiful promise.
There was Tupac Katari, but
okay, sorry,
like
the wrong
from
Tupac.
Bolivia, but similar. But he said that, and he returned. In Bolivia, there is a huge process led by Evo Morales, which is really good. But only I wanted to just mention that that practice of disappearing the bodies and trying to disappear people is happening in the border areas because people are not only being murdered and the bodies are left in the Mediterranean to disappear, but even every time the police gets a body of a migrant person murdered in the border area, they never investigate the name, the identity of that person, and they bury down those bodies without making an investigation. But if they detain the person alive, they do all the investigation in order to deport that person. No? So those practices are continuing with new techniques, let's say.
Yeah, the innovation of the same colonial mindset. And I also have to think, bringing it home to Amsterdam, here we have the Tropen Museum with 40,000 human remains in their archives that are still, not being repatriated. And it's not even in their hands to do it, because it's the royal or the Koninklijke Museum. So it's like in the hands of the Rijk or the king, I guess. Which maybe is a good bridge to the kingdom and the colonization of the islands that is ongoing. Danick, I'm very curious, who is the person, the erased story that you would wish to bring into our collective mind hive today?
Thank you for this question. I think this is a really important question also to hold space for my heroes. I found it a really difficult question, an emotional question. When I think sort of personal heroes, I think of people in my life. I think of the women that I come from. My moms, so my mom and my aunt, who's like my mom's. And my grandma. I come from a very women-centered family, which I think is amazing. And there's a lot of parts of their stories that have been erased. There's a lot of hints that I get from that in my day-to-day life. But I struggle to give voice to a story that's been erased and recovered. I can't talk right now about a story that's been erased. I can't give voice to it. And that's really saddening in a way, that these are women in my life that are alive, that I love and have shaped me, and that have stories that have shaped me and that I don't have full access to. But also, like, so I was reflecting on this question and sitting with it. There's also maybe a bit of agency there that I feel empowered to dive into more. So there's no images back there, because for me this is still a bit of a question mark. But maybe an example of a story that I can give voice to. And this is bringing in the lives of other people. So I'm trying to give voice to a story that's not my own. But we were talking about Shell and climate and the relationship to that, to the islands. And the 30th of May, 1969, 30 de May, some people in the audience may know what that is. There's a lot of stories around that. I can't really give voice to it in a really brief moment, but it was a moment of protest on Curacao around, I'm going to say, the status quo, the way things were, the inequalities around the refinery, but also the colonial status quo. And it's a very important moment in our history, but it's not a story and there's many stories around it, but they weren't told to me very often. I think this maybe also
in school.
No, maybe this relates to the point about what I was taught in history and what I'd like to have been taught. I personally would have liked to have been taught more about this. And a couple of years ago, it was the 50th anniversary of that date. So there was a lot of organizing around it and retelling the stories. And for me, that was also an invitation to ask people around me that were alive at that time, what happened?
What was your version?
What was your version? And also because I was realizing it was a protest around class and social class. And so you're also become very aware of where you stand in the social class and your upbringing and the stories that you were told.
So maybe for people who have never heard of 30 de Mayo, maybe a brief holding of what happened that day?
So the unions around the refinery marched to the city and demanded change and more equal pay is a very shorthand way of saying it. And there was fire, there was marching, there was also a lot of violence from this colonial state at the time to kind of repress it and control it. People died, but also people talk about the history of the island as a before and an after of that date.
Because a very important thing, and this is your story to tell, but I've also worked on this topic with 100-year resistance against Shell, that it started as, like you said, a union protest, which both addressed the racism within Shell, also the unequal pay, but it developed into a protest that was actually a regime change, the fall of a government within a few days. And then also there was a huge role of students who had been educated in the Netherlands and have moved back and had their own magazine, their zine, that had a huge role in kind of educating and being bridge between working class and people who were educating, and that people like the colonial forces were scared that we're going to have another Cuba. So that was also a context of the 60s and everything, which this is a day that we should all learn about.
It's
like there's the
important day, and I also know very little about it, and I'm learning so much more about it since 2019, because that was the 50 years, and so I asked my grandma where she was on the 30th of May in 1969. I feel a little weird telling my grandma's story here, so Mom, keep me accountable at home. But my grandma has always worked in a supermarket. My grandma has one leg. She's had one leg since she was 17, I think. So when people were marching on the street, she was locked in the freezer of the supermarket with her colleagues, fearing for her life, but also not able to go anywhere. And so we're told of this story of people on the street and the government but also not the very many kind of nuances and the other ways and other places that people were. And also, I'm trying to imagine my grandma in 1969. What was she? Was 36. I did the math at home today. She has 2 children. She's locked. She doesn't know what's happening. And I don't know anything else about that story. That's what I know. So
one thing that really struck me when I worked on this issue for an exposition was that the pictures that are in the archive of the Netherlands, or even in Curaçao, are mostly of burning buildings and a burning car. And it focuses property over people. Like that is more important to report about. Also in the NOS, like little blips you can see on YouTube, it's all about property. And that's like a very colonial gaze to analyze a rebellion.
And that was a story that I was never told. So to me it also speaks of sort of that it's an unfinished story, that there's work for me to be done in uncovering the parts that were erased. There's questions that I need to ask myself also about why it was erased. Why is this a story I'm only, first of all, thinking of asking about now, but also wasn't told? So that's where I am at with my stories about my personal heroes.
Thank you. I really feel it. I feel it, and I hope you also feel it. I want to turn to the audience for a moment because this conversation always gets better when we do it together. So I just want to see if there are questions. If there are questions, there should be 2 mics. One is there, and I don't know where the other one is, but at least there's that one. And there's a Jonathan with a mobile mic, which is amazing. So I just want to check what's alive for you right now, listening to all of these stories. And also what I really love about what you brought into the conversation, erasure is an unfinished topic because recovery is not happening, not everywhere, not most of the time. So we can also, our conversation of erasure gets deeper when we can recover more.
Every time.
Yeah. So just checking. Otherwise, I will gladly continue because I have tons of questions for these people. I could talk with them all night. But yay.
I'm still so triggered by the stories being about buildings and not about people. Because that is so layered. And in the silence, I'm like brewing.
So today I found out about Manuel Piar. Manuel Piar was a general for the independence movement in Venezuela, and he was born in Curaçao. So this is very interesting for me because I born in Venezuela and I grew up in Aruba, so I'm kind of the opposite. And this made me think about all the, like we were saying, all the stories that aren't told. How, for example, Shell extracted oil from Lago de Maracaibo in Venezuela. And that's how the Shell was able to become so big as well. And how the war was able to be financed through the refineries of Aruba and Curaçao as well. And my kind of comment or question is more how can we all relate to each other, because it's Geoffrey also said it at some point, like the common thing that we have is that we all we were all colonized or were marginalized to some degree. And how can we connect to each other and our histories? So not just knowing, what happened in Peru, but how maybe that even has a connection to something in the Caribbean and in Africa, and it reconnects everywhere.
Yeah.
Don't know if that's kind of vague, but
no, it's a great question.
Great question.
I think, I don't know if this is a book, but if there's a writer in this room other than me, please write this book, because I don't have the time for it at the moment. The colonizers had basically a playbook, right? Like if you look at what happened in Africa, if you look at what happened in Southern America, and anywhere where they went, they kind of went through the same steps. They did the same things.
There was a design.
There was a design. A great design.
No pun intended.
What design? How was it called? Great design. Piet Hein.
I don't know.
There was a name for this design. Anyway, there was a design, and there was like a series of steps that they would always go through, one of them always being weaponizing religion. And even though it packed out differently in the different countries, what you just said, I'm telling a story and you relate to it. The same story happened where you're from. And I think that's one way in which we can connect and share these stories with each other, is go, okay, what were the effects of this? And you telling me about this person who was born somewhere and led a rebellion somewhere else might make me curious enough to go, hey, were the people like that where I'm from? Or are there people like that in the African history? And you telling me about the kids being, I'm going to say abducted because...
It is.
Yeah.
But I really feel the same because it's a very important question and beautiful one as well. Because I think that we were smashed to the ground. We were really, whether you was a baby or a teenager or whatever, you were being pushed to the ground. And then there's one moment you need to get up. And you need to get up yourself, because there's no way someone else can do your life. There's no way. You should get up yourself. And then there comes this moment. It's like this notion of liberation. And I'm not talking about healing in a way, because you were also tipping the point that there is this ideal that you need to be healed totally. But I don't believe that, because there is no way I can heal totally. And I don't have the ambition to do that. The trauma, it's so invited, because this is me. I don't want to erase the trauma. What I do want is to feel liberated. And I hope that many people feel liberated from all these systematic atrocities, the evil ideas coming from the church, coming from the states, coming from, I don't know, from the capitalism, I don't know, imperialism, call it like that.
Border regimes.
Thank you, Daniela. The thing is now, once being liberated, what's next? And I think that the path for liberation can be something we can all join. I mean, I invite you so much to join my path of liberation, and I'm hopefully being welcomed by your path of liberation, because this is the way we can combine all this healing part. Not only being focused on therapy, but focus on the idea that one day we might be free.
Clap. I also want to turn to Daniela. Maybe you can join us once more, because you're also literally connecting the dots from multiple spaces and connecting with different people in different manners, both through art and militancy. How do you overcome the borders and create this shared fight of fighting erasure?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see that borders is something like constitutional for nation states, no? Those same nation states that have been imposed in the context, for example, of Latin America, that continue oppressing and repressing the people from here that didn't want to live in a nation state shape, for example, no? That was not the way of thinking how we're going to live together after the Spaniards leave, no? But through there was, after independences, a continuum of colonization, and it's aberrant, and for me it's really crazy to see nowadays here in Peru or in Chile, for example, not only how indigenous people are oppressed by that nation state, but how they tear apart the possibility of having relationship with people, for example, from Venezuela or Haiti after the earthquake on Haiti and all the punishment that have been going over that territory. Haitian people started migrating to the States, then they were blocked. And they started migrating, for example, to Brazil, going through Peru. And it was aberrant to see the Peruvian nation state repeating all the ways of persecution, detention, and deportation of migrant people in order to build an idea of progress, in order to look like Europe and say, okay, now we have a migratory control system and we're doing the same that Europe does to Peruvian migrants, to the migrants from Latin America. We're doing the same to Venezuelans, we're doing the same to Haitians, etc. No? So something that I think in the context, for example, of Abya Yala, Latin America, we can think of is that the brotherhood or in between the people of Latin America that is constantly being broken by this reinforcement of the nation states that are not plurinational, for example, like the step that has been taken in the context of Bolivia, that they haven't broken nation state. Okay, but it's a step into that, into questioning nation state as this sort of thing, no? This sisterhood, mostly than brotherhood, no? This sisterhood in between peoples, towns, communities, etc., no, can help a lot to break and to debilitate this type of nation state that comes from Europe, no? There is the formula that Europe conceived living together, which is actually living apart. But then I think there is something really important in regard to the border regime in the context of Europe that is not only like overcoming the situation that is going on now, but it's also to think of a policy of justice and reparation, because all the people that have been persecuted and dead in the last 30 years in the context of Europe, legally by the European Union, with Frontex and with all the police of the nation states of the European members, have to be, we need to make a process. We need to know the names and who are the people, the political responsibles of that, and the material responsibles of that, no? And to create a process of reparation, of giving back the bodies of people that are still buried in the context of Europe, that after a migration process were murdered and buried and disappeared, that have to go back to their territories. And I think that's something really important in a process to overcome that border regime that is creating so much violence and, again, reproducing the same exploitation. Then you see the migrant workforce exploited, and is the working class exploited, most exploited nowadays in the context of Europe due to these policies, no?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I also have to think for the people here in the Netherlands who want to learn more about bordering practices and resistance against it. There's a beautiful podcast called The Verbranders. It has around 20 episodes, and it's both from people. The Verbranders talks about the burners, those who burn the borders of Europe. Some of the episodes are in Dutch, some of them in English, and one of them is about the history of the passport and how that's a colonial history. And it's really the racism without race, because it talks in the language of nationality, but that's really about race, and it's really about colonialism in the global South and the global North. And this episode I can really recommend to everyone who wants to dive in a little bit deeper, to also get the vocabulary and the articulation about how this is really historically coming together. I've just been notified there was one more question in the front of the audience. Yes, wonderful.
Hello. I want to thank you all this has been a really interesting conversation. So I have more of a, I think, comment rather than question. So I'm coming from the English-speaking Caribbean. And this is interesting because from the British Commonwealth, and so, I mean, obviously the Queen just died. And there's been a lot of discussion from when Kate and William. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So they came. Yeah, okay. So when they came to the Caribbean earlier this year, they came to the Bahamas. They went to Jamaica, and they went someplace else. But there was a lot of pushback on the whole idea of them even coming there, because the countries had to pay for it. Right? And like, you have to pay for them to come there, and you're just like, why are the roads being paved? Because they are coming, and like, there's roads that really, really, really need to be paved. Anyway, so that just raised the whole discussion on colonialism and like, why are people so deferential to the monarchy, when in the case of the Bahamas, where I'm from, and in Jamaica, we're both independent countries, right? But you're still a part of the Commonwealth. We have governors general, so there's a governor general in the Bahamas and one in Jamaica. So you still have a representative of the Queen that's there as kind of like a guiding force. They don't really have any political power, but it's still there. So this is rambly, but my point is that I'm listening to the conversation on erasure, and like when you move from Curacao here, I mean, I need a visa to live and work in the UK. Like, I can't move to another Commonwealth country. So the idea of erasure for me is in one way, like, I'm already used to being the majority in my country, and I'm already used to having a lot of people that look like me around me all the time. So it's just interesting to hear it from another perspective. But to your question, guy from Aruba, hi. You were mentioning, like, what are the things that you have that's in common? And I think that there's a lot just in the Caribbean in general, because we tend to, like, put it in silos. So there's, like, Dutch Caribbean, Spanish Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean, that we have very distinct cultures, but there's a lot of things that are in common. Even for the countries that are independent, there's still this kind of, like, how do you re-examine your own identity? And that's a lot of the conversation that's happening in the Bahamas now, because especially with what's happening with the monarchy in the UK, there are people that really, really, really want to stick to the British roots, and our whole system is based on the British system. But we are so close to the States that a lot of American culture comes to us, and, like, Black American culture. So there's a stronger sense of identity with America than British. But then it's like, okay, how do you start to think that your own culture is valued and valuable, not only to yourself, but, like, to other people? So it's like a similar type vibe, but it's, like, really interesting, because I'm like, okay, the erasure part, I'm trying to, like, get in, like, today's society. But even after you get to independence, you still kind of battle with that a little bit.
It's not over.
No, it's
still
not.
there. Yeah,
it's not.
And that's the whole idea also about decolonization. When we talk about it, so often in the Netherlands, people situated in the 60s when there was some flag independence, and flag independence is not decolonization. Danick, I would really love to hear the thoughts in process or thoughts in progress, how that resonates of this beautiful contribution to the conversation.
I want to thank you very much for that, for offering your thoughts. It's going to be really awkward for me to position myself in a way that I can both look at you and speak into the mic. Yeah, I'm going to try. No, a lot of that resonates a lot with the monarchy. I'm going to try not to go into that rabbit hole, because
please do it.
No, it's hard, because I have so many thoughts and opinions on it. I don't want to have a Dutch passport, but I'm also very aware of the privileges that grants me. I don't need a visa to come here. I know the financial opportunities it's awarded me in terms of my education, but I also know the financial burden it puts on my country in terms of coho and all of the other crazy dependencies it creates. And it's one of those topics that I think, and maybe this speaks to decoloniality, I don't have a clear answer for that will work for me, let alone for 150,000 people on a rock that was maybe not intended to be inhabited by 150,000 people. So I don't know, I can ramble about this forever, but I think it's, even though the way that we're attached to, quote unquote, the motherland, and how to carry that into the future, and on which terms for whom, I think that's a really complicated issue. And I would love to see more debate on that, because I think that's one of those things that, as a people, like, we need to decide. It needs to be 150,000 people. It does not need to be The Hague. It also does not need to be me. It needs to be 150,000 people. So that's just on the monarchy. But I hope I speak a little bit to your comment. There's so much.
Yeah, there really is, and thank you for speaking so from the gut, and also in the. There is no way to have a polished answer, I guess, but I'm so happy we're talking about it. And I wonder if there are more thoughts about monarchy and colonialism, the colonial design that we live here.
Of course.
Because these are the things that need to be on the table, that need to be recovered in order to redesign the society. So talking about that redesign.
You know what I think about the whole monarchy? It was meant to, for other people to obey. It was meant for many things, for people to not only erase, but also just disappear, just be not there. unless you pay. And the thing about monarchy also, to me, it's really like, I don't believe it. I have never believed it. I have never saw any glory in it. Like today, it's the Chilean Day of the Glory of the Army. But also this like this whole notion of like glorifying the army is for me just like glorifying the monarchy. Like, what is wrong with us? Are we still doing it? Are we still wearing the orange like color? Are we still doing it? You don't have any idea how many suffering was like in history due to that family. It's like not even, you can see the movies about the mafia in Italy, but they were before, they were even worse. So the thing for me, it's like, how can we make sure that we go into the path of liberation without this family? Like
we gave them 4 ton each more today. Is it today? Am I misquoting the news? A lot of money more to the monarchy.
While people are currently struggling to pay their energy bills.
Starving in the Netherlands. People are really like having a hard time while they are just doing their own like little shit in their little house. I don't know what they're doing. We should stop celebrating. Stop. Just don't do that. I mean, it is like nice for your family, nice for your friends to have a little, I don't know what you're doing all the day, but just stop it. I don't know what I can say more. Maybe you can add something more, but I say stop.
I love what you're saying. I agree. I had I guess discussion is the right word, with someone earlier this week, in like light of the memes and Elizabeth's death. And the meme engine has
storytelling.
Well, like TLDR was me being annoyed at Elizabeth and the person going, yeah, but the monarchy has very little / no political power nowadays and is only seen as head of state. And I'm like, no way.
Colonial story.
When you bring up this part of the topic, it's like, okay, but they're just head of state and wield no political power. At the other time, when it's time for them to accept responsibility for something good, we do praise them. So I'm like, at least measure with one stick and go, if we're going to praise them for the welfare that they brought to their country, let's also hold them accountable for the other things that aren't part. Because they were head of state and your state was operating incorrectly. Your state had laws in place in their own state that their representatives were breaking in other countries. So how are we disconnecting this head of stateness and being responsible for your state versus we're choosing when we're holding it responsible for that, and that frustrates me a lot.
Yeah.
I have a question for the audience, if that's okay.
We'll do that in the bar afterwards. We'll do that in the bar. We have to round up almost, and we're getting loose now, so I love this. I do have a few things to say about the royal family and storytelling. Protest is a way of storytelling, and if you look at who's protesting against the royal family. We had protests in the Netherlands in 2013, which when Beatrix stepped down and you got the other clown. That rhymes. I'm a poet. But that's when people started going to the streets and saying, het is 2013 and the monarchy. They got arrested over and over and over and over again. And then every time, because there was social media pushback, they apologized for arresting. Wait, there should be freedom of speech. But you find out a lot about who you cannot insult, is who is the boss. And now with the monarchy, I've seen some memes of people protesting in the UK, and they keep getting arrested. And this is not new. No. Het is niet nieuw. This is why we need to not erase stories, because there are themes and they're recurring. And once upon a time, those are stories about princes and princesses. Those are, like I said, grooming us to find it normal that there's some be on the queen, like somebody on the throne that is taking all your money and just giving orders and.
But we have to act like in collection. We have to act like Galvarino. I mean, whatever we are afraid of. I mean, it's just like punishment in a sense that maybe you have to pay something or maybe you have to go to jail. But what if we do it like a movement? What if we can really stop this idea? I'm curious to find out, like, whether in 15 years we are liberated from this family. I'm hoping.
That's a question for the audience, and we'll discuss it in the bar. We're going to close this session, unfortunately, but we'll continue it in the bar. And just to close, everybody, I'll start with Daniela. Your little takeaway of tonight, something you want to hold up as one thing you'd love to take away when it comes to redesigning and decolonial design through erasure into remembering and liberation. That's a big question. Just your nugget of tonight, your takeaway, Daniela, very briefly.
Well, for continue talking about the monarchy, which it seems that is unreal, but it's real, and it's the same monarchy. For example, the Spanish ones is the same ones that killed Tupac Amaru. It's the same royal family, no? And it's the same royal family that when Chavez, together with Evo, were talking about colonial history, the Spanish king said, "Why don't you shut up?" That was in all the media saying, look how the king shuts up Chavez, etc. No? And I think it's the same monarchy that recently, for example, have been using the Guernica Picasso painting in Reina Sofia to reivindicate NATO, no? And it was a royal family that was organizing this whole event to reivindicate NATO and to support NATO, no? So I think, and that's what I would keep, that a big step that we need to take is to tear down those royal families that have so many laws and have so much protection, because it's not only that they appear in these dresses and these castles, but because they don't live in houses, they live in castles when people don't have houses. And then they have all this freedom of speech discourse to attack Venezuela, to attack Cuba, to attack Bolivia, and to attack everybody who puts the face against the empire, no? But then they persecute people in Europe, like in Spain, for example. You cannot do artwork critical with the monarchy in certain levels, no? You cannot make any violent or fun image in regard to the monarchy, because they are going to process you. And I think it's a good moment that the monarchy in the context of England is like kind of being questioned to go against all the monarchies in the context of Europe, because they continue imposing power, no? And it's something that we really need to tear down.
I think that is a good takeaway. Thank you so much, Daniela. Danick, what is your takeaway?
Yeah, I like that takeaway. I think we should take power and away from certain groups. An additional takeaway, I think, is how healing storytelling can be. Like we've talked about really heavy topics, and I feel really nice. Which is not to say that I didn't feel at very different moments, like a pit in my stomach and tightness in my chest, but I was here with you all, and I think sharing stories can be very healing and very revitalizing and liberating. So after we finish burning the castles, maybe we can have a campfire and share stories.
I think that should go in the description text of this event. Chautuileo.
I really feel like the joy and the joy of talking with one another, and it's really like what you say, heavy topics, but at one hand it's not new. That's my takeaway. It's not new.
Hashtag it's not new. On to Geoffrey.
Two things. One is for us all to start sharing these old stories with each other, because we all know a little bit, and the more we share, the more we realize that there's a lot of them, and that it is the majority rather than a minority of the stories. And to look at which stories were erased. A lot of people in any given room have never heard of Frontex. Why don't we know that this exists? A lot of people have never heard of the stories that we spoke about. Why don't we know that exists? Some stories were erased to diminish power. Some stories were erased to promote power. Know the difference.
Yep.
Nice.
Wow, I think this was a very rich conversation, and I'm also happy this is just the first one. We're just getting started. We'll be back on the 26th of September. So first, a big thank you to the speakers that we had here tonight. Give them a big round of applause. We'll definitely be continuing this conversation in the bar afterwards. So as I said, this was the first part of Decolonizing Design Triptych. The next one is next week, the 26th. We will be joined by Joris Lechen, Nino Divino, Leana Bove and Anushka Kwandwala. I hope I said that correctly. I think it's going to be a spectacular other conversation, so do join in again. And all of the programs of Pakhuis de Zwijger are made available without paywalls, which is amazing. I love an applause for that. But if you enjoyed tonight, then do consider a donation, or better yet, become a friend by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thank you for joining tonight, and I really hope to see you the 26th with more yummy conversations for decolonizing design. Good night.